Hey everyone, Brian Von VA here, back at it again with another set of D&D stories, and today we're going to be talking about those jokes, goofs, and gaffes DMs of Reddit. What is your favorite way to troll your players? Part 3. My DM in my Sunday game usually doesn't troll us. He usually uses our own characters' backstories to give us Stephen He levels of emotional damage. But after over 2 years of me getting to the best of him, he finally got the chance to get me back for it, and he did not disappoint. I started out in this campaign playing Delkesh, my evocation wizard who was known for 3 things: accidentally burning down taverns, pranks, and bad ideas, which somehow always worked. One of those bad ideas was using Alter Self and Disguise Self together to change his appearance, usually to someone like a guard or a bandit, so that he would fit in wherever we were going without standing out. During these times, his go-to identity was, usually, a male person named Gerald. Gerald had already helped the party survive multiple encounters before, even before his creation. The first time Delkesh used the name, it wasn't to describe himself. Gerald was the new guy who wasn't at his proper post. You know how new guys are, haha, proper unreliable pricks and all that. After that, whenever Delkesh needed to convince a group of mercenaries or bandits to leave their group alone, he would drop in as Gerald and have a chat with them. Gerald got to be so well known that people would remember this man who didn't exist, saying things like, "Hey man, you still owe me 20 gold from last week's poker game," and the like whenever he appeared. In one particular encounter, 2 of the bandits Gerald was talking to got into an argument about whether or not it was cool for Gerald to date the second bandit's sister after having already went out with the first one's sister. This particular campaign was the second time I was playing Delkesh, having brought him in because the DM hadn't run a game since before 5th edition came out, and the rest of our players were new. Well, from the start, the DM and I had planned to have Delkesh lead the party, so the newer players could get their feet wet, before we would eventually have him sacrifice himself to save the party, or retire, and I would bring in a new character. When the time came for Delkesh to retire from the campaign and fade into the background as an NPC, we decided to use Delkesh's backstory of being a former king of Damara as his way to back out of the campaign, being called home due to some political troubles his daughter, the queen, needed his help with. Being that she needed him right away, she sent someone to come in and teleport him back home. So imagine the party's surprise when, in the middle of Delkesh's going away party, the real Gerald walks in. Oh god. Well, it turns out Delkesh met some random guy one day during his travels, and subconsciously started using that guy's appearance to create the Gerald appearance. So as Delkesh started to use that name and appearance to get himself and the party out of situations, people started hearing about those events and equating them to the real Gerald, who realized the best thing to do was, well, just roll with it. Gerald ended up living a charmed life of free drinks, getting invited to parties and such that he had no business being anywhere near, and being with many beautiful women across the world, all thanks to Delkesh borrowing his appearance. Gerald's son hated all this added attention and basically hid himself away. But Gerald's grandson, Gerald III, took after his grandfather and kinda just rolled with it. His name wasn't even Gerald, but so many people knew him as Gerald that he decided there was no point in fighting it. The DM decided since Delkesh was retiring, that would be the perfect time to get me back for all those times I'd used Gerald to mess up his day. And it was brilliant. The bag of holding thing reminds me that in my campaign, I set up an encounter where they find a whole bunch of bags of holding during an investigation into a series of missing persons, where each person missing was the former owner of the now up for grabs bag of holding. Before they get access to any of the bags, I have an NPC tell them some spooky folklore about a creature that crawls out of bags of holding to abduct people. The NPC tells them this because they are wasting their time trying to find the missing people or investigating it at all. This has to be the work of that creature, blah 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 blah. Long story short, the party can have free bags of holding, but not before some spooky folklore and evidence supporting the idea that the bags of holding are getaways for abducting creatures. I designed a trap where the players are locked in a room with an obelisk. When a player touches the obelisk, their character loses consciousness, and I privately tell them a word. The way to solve this puzzle is to have 3 people touch it, get all 3 words. They'll then wake up and put the words in the right order to unlock the door. Only problem is, as far as the party knows, their friend just touched the obelisk and died. So now they're afraid to touch it. That, or the character just randomly wakes up because the DM gets bored of waiting, and the character is just refusing to be themselves, and it's like, oh no, they're a doppelganger. No, they were just unconscious, and they're tired. They're not a doppelganger, they're not a clone. Stop it. I was the GM for a Mutants and Masterminds game. The group was working with a Stark Tech-like corporation and was in the R&D development. In it, there was an alien spaceship, a stone archway, a chest with a skull on it, a giant robot hand the size of a car, and the thing all the science and security were focused on, a baby doll. Think kind of like Annabelle. The truth is that it was just a baby doll. There's nothing special to it. No matter how high they rolled, I always said, well, as far as you can tell, it's just a baby doll. Supplying them with cursed items that aren't actually harmful, but just annoying. My favorite is giving a paladin who wanted to be a Gary Stew a +1 longsword that would cause a fish to jump out of the nearest water source, even a single drop, and smack into his face for 1d4 non-lethal damage whenever it was drawn. See, this one would be kind of useful because you could just rapidly draw the sword over and over and over and over, and you just get free fish. Just put a shield up in front of the dude's face and you're totally good. You got a fish for life. Well, there's actually written and published backstory for pretty much every monster in D&D. This probably doesn't really need to be explained, but what if, upon obtaining the monster manual or a digital equivalent, you, as a GM, went out and hunted down a fair cross-reference gallery of every monster you plan to use in campaign for yourself? Match up the stats for whichever school of thought reached the WotC writers, and promptly change things to some other competing school of thought on said monsters. This works well no matter if you prefer the original Bram Stoker vampire, the Romanian Strigoi, the Anne Rice variant, or you just have a thing for Tarantino and Selma Hayek, either or both. Oh, listen, we don't talk about those. I love that. Or if you decide to track down the original French legend of the Tarrasque, rather than leave the concept up to writers you've never actually met before. Google can still help the players, but it's a lot more work versus reward this way. Cursed items don't have to inflict anything to create a pretty serious nuance. In adventuring, any nuance can become a deadly issue when shit hits the figurative fan. And let's be honest, the whole point of being on an adventure is to be in the thick of it, when the shit is hitting the fan. So cursed throwing knives that can't be further than 10 feet from their master's hand are an obnoxious problem, considering almost everybody tries to throw a weapon farther than 10 feet. Think about that. You fling the dagger hard at your opponent or target, only to have it blink out of existence 10 feet away and appear again in your hand. Sure, you can put it back in the sheath, but even in that capacity, there's no putting it down and walking away. No giving it up, no way to sell it without being openly accused of theft, etc. This can drive novice players into a frothing frenzy, especially in a territory where remove curse is rare and expensive for whatever reason. Probably the nastiest trick I've personally ever played was leaving a silvery dragon mating call. It's a weird instrument that resembled a hybrid reeded instrument and a silver trombone. It was actually tuned, non-magically, to attract the mating attentions of a green dragon at the time. That combined with a somewhat overzealous elf ranger to get several handfuls of dice hurled at me, along with a fountain or 3 of valid insults and a couple of threats. Through a costly combat though, the party and elf ranger managed to narrowly escape that fade to black scene. For total funsies, I also invented the "can of whoop ass." We've all likely heard that expression before. This particular device, however, contains a very angry air elemental with an equal chance of attacking any individual within range of the can upon opening. I defaulted to a 30-foot radius as it seemed most consistently utilitarian. You can take your pick of specific weird or elemental based on the size and shape and stoutness of the party, along with anyone else in question. But just contemplate spending years cooped up in something about the size of a soda can, and upon release, You have no good way of telling who's who or why you've been so abruptly imprisoned. You'd be pretty pissed off too. And elementals aren't particularly renowned for their intellect or emotional stability, including air elementals. So do with the idea as you like. As is, it's a pretty fun and random way to spice things up when least expected. My personal best is a fancy sword with a pile of severed hands next to it. Any curious player would pick it up and find it as a completely normal sword, until they try to put it down. Turns out the only property of the sword is to be stuck on the hand of whoever is holding it, and the only way to get it off is to cut off their hand. Soon, another severed hand joins the collection. I've been told I have a hell of a poker face, which can be fun when you're building up a tense moment and the players are searching for your expression for any sign of you bluffing. Say, for example, the party rolls badly at a stealth check, but the enemies roll lower to spot them. This is a funny moment, and it can be funny for my players as well, but I have to build up the moment. I described the party sneaking past the goblins, noting how coincidental movements, the clang of the camp chef moving metal pots, an argument over if it's pronounced GIF or JIF that gets heated, a goblin gets their head stuck in a basket they were inspecting, all this from the goblins cover up the noise and sight of the party as they're sneaking away and getting their riverboat ready. As I describe them sailing away, a player pipes up. So, wait, we succeeded on our stealth? Me, after a pause, letting the facade break and I start laughing. I've never seen so many nat ones on an NPC group check in my life. So you basically Monty Python their way all the way through a camp. Pretty good. One word. Illusions. Well, okay, maybe a few more. If I decide to throw in an illusionist once in a blue moon, portray them as a coward, having a bunch of illusions that they can pass through until they get to the shadow magic stuff. Somehow they forget, every time, that some illusions can hit back. Oh, you're just a devious bastard and I love you for it. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA here, checking in after the vid. Please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, ring that bell, and of course, leave a comment down below telling us your favorite way to troll either your party or your players. All the love everybody, be safe, and we'll see you next time.